Afrika für Allmanns, Folge Nummer 8, Burkina Faso. And I'm joined again by the wonderful Fenny Ndapewa Nakanyete. Enjoy. So, yeah, welcome to Afrika für Allmanns, back in our show with Fenny Ndapewa Nakanyete. Welcome, most sincerely welcome. Your episode about Angola has had some very nice feedback, and we are here now with one of your favorite countries within Africa, Burkina Faso.
Thank you so much for having me here again, and it's really a pleasure to be back and to share the information that I have about Burkina Faso. I am excited to be here and to share.
Thank you very much. Yeah, especially since you are personally now experienced. You have had travel experience earlier this year, but maybe before we come to your personal stories about Burkina, maybe let's give us some broad idea about where are we geographically right now.
Okay, lovely. So Burkina Faso is a landlocked country found in the western part of Africa. It is bordering with Ghana to the south, as well as Togo, and then you have Benin, slightly portion of Benin that is located to the south eastern part, and Niger to the eastern part and north, as well as Mali, north.
Sahara giants.
Yes, and then you have Ivory Coast to the southeastern part, southwestern.
So it's basically right in the middle of West Africa, right?
Absolutely. So it doesn't have any coast because it's landlocked, right in the middle.
And is it already in the Sahel zone? Because I remember from the geographical aspects that's in the north, Sahara starts soon, but then is there also...
It is part of the northern part of Burkina is actually Sahel. It forms part of the Sahel region, which is basically the desert.
Yeah, so the climate and let's say maybe the fertilizable ground is then maybe not so easy to agriculture, right? It must be a bit more of a rough...
Yeah, I do relate Burkina a bit to Namibia because it is indeed very dry. Generally, it doesn't have a lot of rainfall patterns.
Yes.
Most subsistences farming is actually based on irrigation, and this is basically life is supported by the river channels that they have.
Okay, so river channels.
Yes. So it's quite
rivers.
dry. Yeah, it does have. In fact, the name the initial name of Burkina Faso, which is AfA Volta, comes from the Volta River that is very important and of significant use.
The one in Ghana, right?
It dries out in Ghana, but it emerges right in the northern part of the region.
Okay, so AfA Volta meaning like northern Volta, and then they changed it to Burkina Faso at some point.
Correct. That's correct. So it gets its names from the initial name, which is AfA Volta, from the Volta rivers that or the channels of Volta rivers that meet up within Burkina, and basically it means northern part of the Volta.
That's nice. And the Burkina Faso then? What do you know? Do you happen to know? I don't want to...
So the name Burkina was given to the country after a lot of coup d'etat, which we will get to in brief.
Okay, no stress.
And so it was a name given by a very significant Pan-Africanist young man known as Sankara.
The trigger boy. We have him already in here. I knew this was going to come up at some point.
Yes.
So he was giving the name. That's
he gave the name Burkina to the country. So it's actually Burkina Faso. And Burkina is derived from one language which is known as Morsi.
Morsi?
Yes, or sometimes they are called More people. And this basically means honorable people or upright people, or uncorruptible people.
That's a good attitude, yeah?
Yes, so that's Morsi. And Faso is derived from a language called Jula. So Jula is one of the biggest languages as well. And this means fatherland. So it's a fatherland of,
the
incorruptible
honest,
people.
Yeah, the honest. That's a
honest people, yes.
Interesting, very interesting the genesis of the name. And so I assume by your definition, and then those two ethnicities are also the most dominant within Benin, right? Morsi and
maybe not as much. Yes, historically, the Morsis were actually the rulers of the country, or basically the area, because by then it wasn't existing as a country. But in terms of the Jula comes in a little bit later, and it's still not the second biggest like language per se. About 10% or so. So basically, the Jula people, the Morsi, about 40% of the population.
Which is roughly 12 million, I think by now, 11, 12, something
around
like that.
There.
So you can get an idea.
Yes, to have an idea. And then you have the Fulanis. The Fulanis are basically found everywhere in Western Africa, generally, and they
It's a Bantu?
None of these languages are Bantu. Actually.
Interesting.
The languages and the family of the languages are from the Niger, Congo. It's a branch that is also, associated to the Bantu, but the Bantu is basically another family. So Niger, Congo, A and B. But so basically, after the Morsi people, you have Fulani that are significantly larger than the Jula, and then you also have some Gurma people.
Gurma?
Yes, the Gurma people are located near Togo, as well as Niger. And then you have other tribes like the Gurunsis, the Senufo, and many others.
Yeah, I think people underestimate by our introduction maybe the size of Burkina. That it's pretty significant, right? There's like some 275,000 kilometers square. So this is gigantic still, for European context especially.
In the European context, we can actually relate it between Great Britain and Italy. The size is relatively big, but maybe as a Namibian, I would still think it's
tiny,
very small.
Tiny. At least in terms of size.
So in terms of size, also in terms of population, it's quite significant, because it has, the UN estimates the population to be about 19 million, almost close to 20 million.
Okay,
Yeah.
I take back my assumption. Maybe I mixed it up with Benin, my number earlier, but you are the expert. We take your numbers granted.
That's the 2018 estimate, population estimate.
I think also the fertility rate is pretty high, so we can expect some more coming.
Yes, it is actually one of the biggest or larger. What do they say? Do they say biggest?
In terms of
fertility rate?
Fastest growing countries.
Yeah, in terms of
or highest fertility rate. Yeah, exactly.
Very correct.
You're right.
It is one of the highest, or the country with the highest fertility rate, because it has about per woman about 5 to 6 children.
Wow. That's
so it's quite large.
Yes,
and
in terms
demanding
of
population growth,
I guess also,
and so forth. Yes.
And just to finish up the language part, then of course I assume, at least officially, the main language in terms of bureaucracy then will be French, right?
Yes, the official language, because of the history, is French. So that's the official language. The most spoken, though, I think, from what I heard from the people of Burkina, is Morsi.
Morsi, okay.
Yes, as much as the official language is French, other, cultural groups also tend to speak Morsi. But then interestingly, in terms of business-wise, business language is actually Jula.
Jula, okay, so it's a triple situation.
Yes,
we have all three.
It is because the capital city. Before we start mentioning my favorite, this name I of course, because I'm a geographer, so when I first heard it, I thought it was like, oh,
for me it was
cool.
When I saw it was just like boom, especially within African capitals. I think this is the most.
It's amazing. It's the capital city's name is Ouagadougou.
Ouagadougou. It sounds shorter than it looks like. It's really Ouagadougou.
Yeah, really. Ouagadougou. So Ouagadougou is more of basically in terms of administrative business or administrative issue. But Bobo Dioulasso, which is the second biggest city where the Bobo, the Jula people are found, is more of a business-oriented city.
Okay.
Yeah, so business language is
derived from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So coming to the, or maybe closing then with the geographical part a bit, I think we see also in terms of economy that Burkina is one of those places where it's very tough to have some real industry, at least compared to other nations, and also the natural resources are a bit limited, right? So the access for, let's say, economic growth are a bit more difficult, I assume, in Burkina than, for example, in Niger or Mali or other neighboring countries, right?
Yeah. Well, in terms of Niger and Mali, I am not so sure, but it is possible. All I know is that because it's so inland, it is
the transportation especially must be hard,
exactly.
Right?
So it collaborates with neighboring countries in terms of trade, and
ECOWAS.
and all that.
I mean,
ECOWAS as well. But surprisingly, Burkina is the fourth largest producer of gold.
Oh, wow.
In
really?
Africa.
It's gold.
Yeah. So that's after South Africa, Mali, and what is the other one? And Ghana.
Ghana.
Yes.
Okay.
So the fourth largest. And when it comes to cotton, which is biotechnically modified because of the climate situation, it is recognized as one of the highest in the world.
So that's the basic
that's the
sources of income then
absolutely,
also for the nation. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you happen to know a bit about the political situation in Burkina?
Yes, that's a very, very interesting one, and that touches into the history. So basically, Burkina became an independent nation that was once owned by the French in about 1919 or so.
So early? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So that as an independent state, because remember, maybe I shouldn't say independent, but it was under France.
But still, it became a state.
Yeah.
Because the French had this huge landmass, right?
Absolutely. So the huge landmass was known as the French West Africa. And this included a lot of countries: Senegal, Togo, Ivory Coast,
technically
Mali.
all except maybe Ghana and Nigeria. Right?
Absolutely.
That's like all of West Africa.
Yes, technically. And so in 1919, it separated from this big, United States or whatever. So then it was colonized by the French until 1960.
1960? No.
So between 1960 and during the colonization, it was known as French Upper Volta.
Yes, I remember.
And between 1958 and 1960, it changed the name to Republic of Upper Volta.
Okay,
so French,
still,
was removed from the name basically. And since then, there were a lot of coup d'état, like military outthrowing the governments that were in rule. So one remarkable point, a young man who was also in the military first became a prime minister in 1983, if I'm not mistaken, and in 1984 became the president on the 5th of August 1984.
Oh, 5th of August. You have that date saved, so it must be very important.
Very important, because that day would change Burkina Faso, for a very long period of time in terms of a country and as an African country to the Africans. This was a very inspiring moment. So the president who took over, a young man known as Thomas Sankara.
Thomas Sankara, very important name.
So he was equated to the let's say the revolutionaries, like the likes of Che Guevara, and
so
Castro.
Communist, you can say, right?
Yes,
he was communist.
Absolutely. To me, Sankara, from the readings and what I learned a lot about him, he was basically a humanist. He could be anything that was against injustice, and many more. He wanted, Africa in general to be independent from, this
imperialism, maybe.
Absolutely.
Let's say, politically.
So he was a humanist. He was environmentalist. When I went to Burkina Faso, I found it very remarkable that they had like these big trees in the middle of nowhere, and I wondered, like, how did this happen? It turned out that because there was drought in the early 1980s, drought and famine, and the Sahel was actually, as a region, was approaching, into the inland, and people were obviously affected. So he organized that people plant about 10 million trees
to fight the Sahel zone.
Fight against desertification, against desertification. So he was an environmentalist. He also worked with the working class to redistribute land among the people. He was feminist to me. He basically abolished, female genital mutilation, which was common in this area or in West Africa in general. He also abolished forced marriages and polygamy. So he did that. And in the area, there were also, kids that were, born and infected by diseases that could be easily, prevented by vaccination. And during his takeover, or as a leader, he arranged that all these children, about, I think, I don't remember the exact number.
Significant numbers.
But so he
and he was very young, I think.
He was very young. He was 33.
Wow.
When I'm not sure if he was 33 when he took over or when he died. So he died in October 1987, sadly. To me, Burkina, if it maintained having, Sankara, it could be what is Rwanda today. Would
Kagame,
have been Burkina, since he took over. And you can imagine how, amazing it would have been today.
Yeah, I mean,
with
we
his
see, for
leadership.
example, Mandela's influence as a long-term leader. If he stayed in South Africa, that could have happened to other countries too. Maybe if they had a long lasting leader in that regard. And it's very fascinating to me, at least. I in the preparation of this, I read up a bit because you informed me that this will be a majority of the content. And he was also like a soldier, strongly soldier. And I remember the quote: a soldier without education is a potential criminal.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how he foresees some of the tendencies we see now in many more or less unbureaucratic countries,
Yes.
where then soldiers which are not in a war actively then
Yeah.
become unfortunately criminals. So he has a big emphasis on education.
He did, and himself, he also studied. I think he went to study in Madagascar at one
Okay.
point. Yeah, so he also loved reading. He loved music. Yeah, so he was very well informed and appreciated the African culture in general. Was against injustice, and so
Very
this
nice.
was an amazing person.
But then what happened?
So in 1987, a person who actually trusted him as well, and they worked together, killed him. So in the coup d'état, another coup d'état.
Also, they tried to throw over the government.
Yes,
again.
they outthrown them, and then him, and they also, killed him. Unfortunately, so he
Seems a
died
very-
before he could reach his dream, and we are still, like.
There has been no substitute, at least. No proper person to connect or like to continue his
legacy.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, the government that outthrew him was in power until the late 2000s.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like
the first decade of 2000.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it was only, in fact, he wasn't even recognized per se. When you go into the streets of Ouagadougou, you would expect, some kind of symbol that is put out there to maintain his noble, or to appreciate his noble
Yeah,
work.
or his achievements, exactly.
But
Yes.
it was only, I think, in May or April that a statue was erected in his name.
Oh.
Otherwise, yeah, unfortunately, his work seemed to have not been documented good enough because of this opposition that had, outthrew him, and maintained in leadership until, the first decade of the 2000s.
Yeah, I mean it's a big gap to leave open. I think you can see how Che Guevara as a soft power even nowadays shapes the youth culture and things like that. If you could make the memories of Sankara a bit more nostalgic, maybe Burkina as a country would even benefit from it. Some more revolutionary tourism vibes.
Totally,
Who
I
knows?
agree.
But yeah, that's very interesting. And maybe now that we've heard about the most relevant hero, at least in the recent times,
Yeah.
to me at least, one small note, I mean, dying early also has a big benefit. We shall not forget that. Like if we see Lumumba, or as you mentioned already, some revolutionaries as Che Guevara, also part of their reputation comes from dying young and charismatic. And, old, boring men are not so much memorized.
Yes, in fact, what I really love, and also maybe could be problematic about the Burkinabe youths, is that they are very rebellious.
Rebellious.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they are likely to stand up for injustice, and they would do all they can to, to speak against it. So I think in 2015, that was the last, I think we could call it the coup d'état.
Coup d'état, okay.
Another one where not the military this time, but I think the youths stood up against the previous president, and he was outthrown. Another, person took over. The names are always, like, especially when they are
no stress.
French.
I think names especially are not that important because people will not Google them by hearing so easy, right? So it's just to get an idea.
Yeah, so that was in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, and then somebody immediately took over before the current president, who is in power since 2015, Kabore, took over. So at the very beginning, in terms of trade unions that were set. The youths were, rebellious also against this French, trading.
Yeah.
Whatever it's
There's
called.
still some dependencies. I mean, EFA and these.
Unfortunately, yes. This common currency that is used by French-speaking or francophone countries, as they are called, to an extent, still is connected to the French economy and so forth. So
it has its up and down. Yeah, some stability aspects, but also it's basically a dependency onto the fiscal policy of France. But let's see, I was reading at least some plans of the ECOWAS to, as a role model with the European Union, to have also its own currency at some point, just to have it easier for individuals to travel between the countries, right?
Yeah,
because you notice it, right?
Even myself, I was in Burkina or West Africa, like this little portion of West Africa, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso, in February and March, and I realized how easy it was on my pockets also just to use one currency in the three countries, Burkina, Togo and Benin.
Oh, they have the same currency?
Yeah, same currency.
I didn't know. See,
so it's this CFA, they call it.
They have it, okay.
Yeah, so they use it in all, like, francophone. They have two. One that is, central kind of francophone countries.
Yes, and I think there's some added ones even, like Equatorial Guinea, and they also implemented.
I think, did they remove?
No, they are also as CFA.
Oh, now they are part of. But that's the CFA that is connected to Cameroon.
Central African CFA.
Yes.
And there's the West African one.
And then
you're right.
the West African is the one now that you have in Togo, Benin, Ivory Coast, Mali, Senegal, and the likes.
Okay, so then ECOWAS will basically just be a replacement currency for the whole of West Africa then, probably with Ghana and Nigeria.
I mean, even they were even talking about the currency, one currency for Africa.
Wow, that is ambitious.
I don't know how. Yeah. It's very, very ambitious, and I think in terms of the living standards and also I don't know how it works. It would work, but let's not go into this detail.
Now that we have smoothly transitioned from one topic to the other, how was then going over the check marks for you as a Namibian citizen? Was it easy to transit between countries?
Kind of. Well, first of all, maybe about the migration or whatever around West Africa for West African. Before I go into my personal experience, is what I really loved about West Africa is that you just need your ID to go from one country to another. For example, if you're traveling from Ghana to Burkina Faso, you don't need a passport.
That's nice. So in everyday life, it's easier.
As a West African, as a Namibian Southern African going into West Africa, I needed visa for all the 4 countries that I was traveling into, and therefore it was quite easy to obtain. Basically, I had gotten, and from my understanding, it is kind of possible to get one visa for not necessarily all the Western African countries, but certain West African countries that are grouped.
Okay.
But for me, I basically got a visa for Ghana, and when I was in Ghana, I went to the embassies of Togo and Burkina Faso, whereas I could get the visa online for Benin.
Nice. So
it was quite smooth.
Accessible.
People were very welcoming. I felt like I had this privilege of coming from Southern Africa, sadly, in one way, because when they were, looking at my passport and they were like, "Oh, you're from Namibia," and then at one point I was traveling with the Nigerians, and they basically were looking into luggages and so forth, and they just say, "Oh, you're from Namibia. Okay, then I don't have to look." Which was lovely, but on the other hand, it also says a lot about the division and stereotypes that go around you know.
Yeah, I mean, Namibia is to some extent, I think, recognized at least as more or less well off. I mean, we will talk about that, I'm sure, in the Namibia episode. Don't get stuck too much on this, but so that's interesting then. But one thing, if we talk already about your travels, what gave you then the reason to say to me, at least, that Burkina Faso would be your most remarkable destination out of those all very interesting sounding countries?
Because
right?
it actually caught me off guard. Because you hardly hear anything about Burkina. The first time it really rang the bell before learning about it in I think high school or so. Was when a friend made a remark. She was going to France, but she didn't want to mention that she was going to France. So what she said was, "Oh, I'm going to Ouagadougou." And everyone was saying, "So why would you go to Ouagadougou?" Like that. That was probably 7-8 years ago.
Okay.
And that's the very first time
you heard
I
that
remember
name,
I had.
Ouagadougou.
Yeah, I heard it before, but it rang much of a bell then. And then when I was doing a research a little bit about West Africa and where I could go, I came across this amazing architecture, because I'm really into African, architecture, African, style of everything. So I came across this lovely architecture that is for the Gurunsi people that are found between Ghana and Burkina Faso. And I really wanted to get there. And I that's how I decided to go there in the first place. But I thought I would just go to the southern part of Burkina and not go inland, because sadly sometimes there was what is it called, the attacks.
Okay. Terrorists or
terrorism.
Boko Haram,
Yeah. They are also, unfortunately, and in the northern part of Burkina, there is some kind of instability because of
Sahel zone is a dangerous
close to
area,
to the Niger border. You have terrorism attack because of Boko Haram and the likes. What was
so
I
you were
saying?
scared a bit to go there?
Yeah, I was concerned because whatever I read about didn't really mention good things about Ouagadougou, besides the terrorism attack and attempt that were done in 2017, 2016, and I think around those years. So I was reluctant, but then my friend who was in France, or is in France, Grace, was so persistent in putting me in touch with Burkinabés that live in Ouagadougou in case I want to go.
Burkinabés is the people of Burkina Faso, right?
Yes. So Burkina, like I said, it's from Morsi, Faso from Jula, and Bé is from Fulani. Fulani is another group.
Burkina
so
Faso.
I think it's amazing how they come up with this mixing to basically impress the
maybe unite the different identities.
Unite and also embrace the diversity.
Yes.
I haven't seen any country doing that with names mixed from different cultures.
Even in the name of the country, having a combination of two, that's really impressive.
So the people from Burkina Faso are Burkinabés. Yes. So she put me in touch with
obviously.
them, and they were very welcoming before they could even meet me or see me, whatever. They were like, "You're welcome, sister." And I felt like, okay, in this case, I have no other choice but to get there. So I got to the capital city of Ouagadougou. They took me in. I was living with a group of men, musicians, amazing ones. So that's how I got there, and I really, really, really fell in love with the people and the culture.
So would you then, by that definition, say also the culture was in compare at least to what you saw on that trip in Ghana differentiable or?
Inland, yes, inland it is. On the borders between Ghana and Burkina Faso, they do share, ethnicity basically because of the division that was done.
Superficial a bit. Yeah.
Exactly, just like in Southern Africa. So. What did I want to mention?
In terms of maybe the culture that you, or the music,
yes, the
like
music.
Food, is it differentiable? Would you say from?
In terms of the music, the kora. Do you know the kora?
No.
The kora is like a guitar-like, but also it's like oral. Do they say oral? It's a circle, and it has about 12 strings, and it has this. It's actually my favorite musical instrument among all of them.
Remember?
Yes. So this is from the Mandinga people or Mandinga Kingdom. So Burkina Faso being, also having the population from this originally from this kingdom, who came into their land as trader, and maybe that's where we can also talk about how Islam was brought in 15th centuries. Somehow, the music thrived in this country. Derived from the culture of Malinga people. Yeah. So in terms of the culture and music, this instrument is very, very significant in not just in Burkina Faso, in Mali, where the kingdom was known to be. In Gambia, it is very also the famous musicians that play kora are actually between Gambia and of course Mali.
Mali, interesting. Yeah. So kora, like not the kora, but just kora. I will keep that in mind. That's always nice to know the local instrument. And in terms of food, maybe some associations
In terms of food, what I really got, the impression that I got is that somehow they are doing good, more better than Namibia.
Okay, wow.
In terms of being, in a very dry climate, but having a variety of food that you can find in the, streets, local markets, and so forth. It's quite diverse somehow because they do have amazing irrigation system. Yeah. I think they also use more of the genetic modification to increase food supply. But my favorite is, I forgot what they called it, but it's basically a sandwich.
A sandwich, all right.
It is so good. A sandwich made with, veggies and beef and so forth.
That's impressive.
But really, like fruits, you can find in the streets, local markets selling fruits. And you see strawberries in the streets, and you're like, where are strawberries coming from when it's such a dry
country? I was reading it's only like 3 or 4 months a year that you can actually grow something. So
I think it's the irrigation system is really significant in the country. I think that's also one of the differences between Namibia and Burkina, both being in dry climates. They do have inland forever or always flowing rivers. In Namibia we don't have that, unfortunately.
It's abandoned masses of land. That's true. Yeah, but that's a very nice, I think, association one can get for Burkina Faso. And now, just as a small maybe add-on that I would love to talk to you about, I was recording. Now that we are speaking, it is already published, a little podcast about Benin. Yeah. And within Benin, I came across the majority of people being actually believers of voodoo, or voodoo, as they said in Benin. And it's the origin country, right? And I remember from our previous conversations that you have not only been there, but also some experience, because I was, to be honest, I was not really sure what to get out of it. And I mean, we in the West have the stereotype of some voodoo poppy, and you put in needles and somebody else will hurt, So I was really impressed how big it actually is in terms of the culture in Benin.
Yeah.
Maybe to give us a small idea.
Yeah.
I mean, for all the Burkina Faso enthusiasts, now is maybe the time to Google all the interesting information we had.
Yeah.
But for the ones who are listening, still this question just really grinded me. So
maybe I can relate to the like this voodoo religion, to the religion of the Kassana people that are actually Gurunsi, a subgroup of Gurunsi people that I mentioned that build with amazing architecture. So they believe in a similar religion where the a boa, which is a python, is actually recognized as the higher power.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So like a goddess kind of.
Yeah. So it is believed. Well, when it comes to voodoo is basically meaning invisible world.
Invisible world.
Yes. So when we die, according to voodoo culture and religion, or spirituality rather, we don't just, there is reincarnation, or what do they call it? Reincarnation. And therefore, when one is good, as a good person, before dying, their spirit remain as good, and it becomes ancestral, spirit, and that is actually acknowledged. And a boa in the traditional beliefs of the Kassana people is known to be one of the angels of let's say of the religion or spirituality of.
So you, as soon as you die and as soon as you did good, become an angel, technically.
Yeah, a deity. So people associate, your spirituality or your beingness after death to, certain deities, and a snake, the python, is one of them.
Interesting. But then how comes it that how do you explain maybe for yourself the let's say maybe divergence between the very, very spiritual or very natural perception of voodoo and the Western idea of it?
Oh, definitely there is a big difference. When it comes to the ideas that is fed into the, not just in Western world, but also in Africa, the perception is that voodoo and witchcraft is
witchcraft is more or less the
voodoo and witchcraft is the same, but then voodoo is supposed to be not harmful. Voodoo is not harmful, and so when somebody is using their spiritual power or whatsoever one could call it to harm others, that it wouldn't be considered as voodoo.
So but their concept of people having these powers doesn't transfer to everybody, right? There's individuals which do have that, and which don't, right?
Sorry,
and others who don't have this power. So it's like a given gift.
Yeah, it's
so you can associate someone with having power as a voodooist, maybe, or something, and maybe this is the contrast then to, let's say, Abrahamistic religions, where technically everybody is just obeying to the god, or is like a believer in the god, but there's no individual power in terms of spirituality.
But Jesus was a...
I mean, Jesus, but as long as correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I understood, there's actually newborn people within voodoo, at least, which are considered to have...
I think that's more of...
powers.
I think we should do another podcast just on
voodoo.
voodoo.
It's already looking like
mind.
No problem.
Because then it's very, very difficult to get into detail.
Especially if it's such a sensitive. I mean, I know it from my Muslim friends. Don't do too much on spiritual questions.
Really, I think when it comes to voodoo, from my understanding, is basically that there is a power in us that
in everyone.
Yeah, that is. Kind of initiated by the ancestors, and sometimes they inhabit our bodies, our souls, and so forth, and they do things, but supposedly this is not supposed to be harmful.
Okay, interesting.
And the moment that it is harmful, then that's not voodoo.
So maybe just to take something out of it, then rather than seeing it with a mainly negative perception, see it more as a ancestral.
Yeah, I mean, just
sort
see
of religion,
it as
right?
any other spirituality.
Yeah.
Like,
So
and
it's
and
not
that's it.
to be like a witchcraft.
Yeah, no, I
So
wouldn't. I would definitely.
I know
distinguish.
I jumped out of the box with this topic. I didn't prepare you for that, but
Yes.
thank you very much for the insight. If
Thank
you have
you.
anything else to add, please give us. Otherwise, I'd say I'm very happy to welcome you back before your next project will start in Namibia, and let's see if we find some other ground. But thank you very much so far, and
Yeah.
yeah.